welcome to the Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio, broadcasting live from Fraser Park, California, which, much like Los Angeles proper, does not have a march against Monsanto this year. Sharon, as my life partner and co-host, what do you make of this? Why can't LA seem to get its act together?
What about Fraser Park? Where's their march against Monsanto? We've got 2,000 people. Something can be thrown together.
I think so, but, Fraser Park is right on a county line, so it's like there's some identity crisis going on there, and it's throwing the whole vibe off.
I think it's just called peace and relaxation. Everybody's just walking around. The thrift stores cost very little. Uh-oh, I just said it on the air. I think
oh, boy.
And all the LA people are going to come in and raise the prices on us.
As per usual. How many times have we seen that?
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Anyway, so we have a great show here. We have a lot to talk about. We got March Against Monsanto, not in Los Angeles proper, as I said, but there are two marches. One is in Long Beach and one is in Canoga Park. If people want to go to their Facebook pages or MySpace pages, I'm kidding. But if people want to check that out, there are two marches that I know of going on, but not one in downtown or in Hollywood as there have been in years past. And actually, the March Against Monsanto has gone through some ups and downs since we started going in 2013, I believe was our first. And it's been an interesting ride for sure.
Yeah, there's been three that I attended, and I think there was one before that. And this would have been, I guess, the fourth one. It's hard to keep up. LA seems to skip years, but last year's march was so epic that I think maybe that's why we got to take a year off, because last year something
still in recovery mode.
Well, it was an amazing march. It was so successful. I actually put a little video about this on the Vimeo page for the Kembo because it was so amazing. We were marching without a permit at this one. In previous years, there had been permits obtained, and the march sometimes would be in places where there was no one around. Like, we got a permit to do a march in downtown LA, but it was a Saturday and nobody was at work, and it was completely dead. So we were just marchers hanging out together without an audience.
That's right.
But last year's March Against Monsanto in LA was monumental. No permits were obtained for this one, and we met at Sunset and Vermont.
That's right, at the Red Line station.
Yeah, and there were a lot of people, hundreds of people. And the marchers set off going north on Vermont.
Just went right out into the street.
In the middle of the street, blocking traffic.
And just went west on Hollywood Boulevard on a busy afternoon.
Well, we blocked traffic, and the police officers were very upset. And they were sounding their sirens and on their bullhorns, demanding that we get out of the road or we could be arrested. And they kept on going and going, and the sirens wouldn't stop, but nobody would listen. Everybody just kept on marching.
Well, also, there were enough people filming that they couldn't really pull out their batons and do a Rodney King on, 500 people in the middle of Hollywood Boulevard.
Yeah, too many people around for this one.
Yeah, that wouldn't go over.
But anyway, it went really great. We marched all the way down Hollywood Boulevard. They kept sounding their sirens and yelling at us to get out of the road. Some of them were pretty agitated, but it was such a great march. We had the Aztec dancers, which are amazing. They have dancing and drumming, and it's really cool to watch.
And you in fact did something pretty monumental at the beginning of that march.
Oh, well, I was the one that when the cops were saying that we had to get out of the road, I was the one that said, "Don't do it." I yelled out. And then as soon as I did that, I wondered, oh boy, I think this is going to be trouble.
But it wasn't. It was quite the antithesis of trouble. It was everyone being very peaceful, doing the march down the middle of the street, not minding the cops at all. They couldn't do anything. And the people that were driving by, because they had blocked off one half of the street and the other half was kind of bottlenecked, but the people that were driving by were honking their horns and giving thumbs up and waving. They were totally into it. So it's
nobody wants to eat that crap
exactly
anymore.
So it was quite a success. And then from there it went up into Griffith Park and off the main road, and it was a very nice experience. But this year we have nothing.
That's okay. That's okay. Last year was great. Yeah. And we have marches in Long Beach and Canoga Park. So Canoga Park, I think, is technically part of LA.
It is.
And a great lesson was learned at the march last year. Civil disobedience works.
That's right. It does work. It certainly does. But, the fact remains that they just can't get their act together. I mean, the website URL for this year's March Against Monsanto is March Against Monsanto.
Well, that's their
with
Facebook.
An extra T. I don't know about you, Sharon, but I'm sick of these Monsanto people coming in and just adding extra consonants where there don't need to be any, and just, we don't need that.
Yeah, they're really manipulating the language too much with all
Yeah,
those extra
they need
consonants.
to stick with the GMO slow
Right.
kill stuff and just, poison us very slowly and subtly, deny everything, and, just stick with that whole rhetoric. It's worked for, 70, 80 years. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, nonetheless, there are 2 marches against Monsanto in Los Angeles area. So you can go check that out. And on the March Against Monsanto website, they list all the marches worldwide. So that's going on Saturday, the 21st.
That's right. We will be there at one
At
of
one of
at
them.
one of
I don't
those
know which
two.
one.
But yeah, marches in general are, it's a very interesting subject for us.
Well, okay, with marching, it's kind of one of those things where I sometimes think, what am I doing here? I'm just hanging out with a bunch of like minded people. Is anybody noticing? Then I realized that actually it is about hanging out with like minded people. So
Hmm.
I don't see the marches as really accomplishing that much. I mean, Monsanto is going to do what they do until we stop buying it. So, march or no
Of
march,
course.
it's up to us to buy it or not buy it. If we want Monsanto to thrive, we can keep on buying Cheetos. And if we don't like that stuff and we want healthy food, then we can just take our money away from Monsanto. Learn what products have corn in them and don't buy them.
Well, that would take personal
You just have to
responsibility.
you have to read the ingredients and also maybe try to buy some fresh food produce instead of packaged food.
But personal responsibility is kind of catching on a little bit, I think.
I
And that's where it hurts them the most, is when you don't buy most of the corn products. You don't buy most of the soy products or any stuff that will be harmful. And that's what it is. It is weaponized food, and people are starting to figure that out. But yeah, it at least keeps people off of Facebook and off of their iPhones when they go out there.
Well, that's actually the point, I think. And as far as do marches accomplish the goal of putting Monsanto out of business? Probably not. Probably not buying their product would accomplish that goal, and telling people you know about it, and then they won't buy the product. But I think what the march accomplishes is gathering people together in a public place where they could communicate, not on cell phones, not on Facebook, not on the record. This is not recorded by the NSA because we're doing it in public. I mean, unless there's a camera on us. But I think it would be the situation where they couldn't necessarily pick up dialogue. So the point is that it's a chance for people to get together and see that they're not alone. And there are many other people who hold their same views, and perhaps there are other issues that you had in common as well. So that's what I've noticed at the marches. It's a good chance to come together.
Absolutely, I concur. And I remember my very first march was in 2003. I was freshly 18 and I was very
That
excited to
sounds like
do
a
it.
porno magazine, freshly 18.
No comment.
Okay.
Anyway, so
Sounds really dirty.
we can save that stuff for another episode. The X-rated after hours version of the episode. Anyway, so 2003, it was a big anti-war protest. The United States had just quote unquote invaded Iraq, although it was more just like shelling them from a distance. But needless to say, I went, and there were many, many people. I couldn't even couldn't even recall how many people were there, but you meet friends pretty much instantaneously, and you pick up a sign, you borrow someone else's. There's always signs around, and yeah, it is. Sharon, you're absolutely right. It is that just meeting the like-minded people and realizing, hey, I really am not alone here, not just in my thought, but the other people actually have the desire to get up off the couch and come out and be seen and do something.
Yeah, there were a lot of anti-war protests back then, and I participated in many of them in Portland, and I even did one in Olympia, Washington. While going through there, there was a protest going on, and pretty much they did them daily in Portland. There was tons of protesting. Of course, the first one was huge, and then every subsequent one was tiny. That seems to be the nature of these movements. That's why I was happy last year at the March Against Monsanto when all of a sudden, after it kind of dropped off a lot more people showed up. So that was great. There are sometimes issues, though, where I feel like, the march is going to be a little too chaotic and I don't want to deal with it. Like the first chemtrails march that we went to in Santa Monica, we showed up It was the Global March Against Chemtrails and Geoengineering, and this was before we knew about orgonite. So we figured that marching was the best we could do. Because what else could you do? They're spraying us, right?
Yeah.
So we went and did the march, but it was not so simple. I mean, we showed up and there was just chaos and people arguing and trying to get people, passersby, to understand what was going on. And this was just at the meeting point before the march even began. And people thought we were crazy, because this chemtrail thing, this was 3 years ago.
Yes.
And it was even considered more crazy 3 years ago than now.
But you stepped up on that pedestal, and literally it was a pedestal.
Well, it was a cannon in Santa Monica.
And you stepped up there and you just kind of sorted things out and told people to stop arguing and, presented in a calm and rational manner if you want to be taken seriously. And that video is on YouTube.
That's true. John Graff, I think, put that one up. So anyway, that was kind of dramatic. But the march
Chemtrail activist tells how she woke up, I believe is the title.
That was my first time being not anonymous anymore.
Yeah.
Because I started as an anonymous blogger about chemtrails, and I was really scared that the NSA would find out. And of course, I knew my email was tied to it. I was so paranoid back then. But things change. I think that paranoia is actually diminishing now, which is a positive change in general.
Yes. Yes, it is definitely diminishing. And I'm just glad at this point that March Against Monsanto is one of those things that has not been subverted by controlled opposition. And that's a big topic for us. And we've glossed it over on past shows, but I really would like to spend a few minutes talking about this very crucial aspect of many issues. It's not just chemtrails, but it's obviously anything that is subversive and goes against the dominant mainstream narrative.
Yeah, well, controlled opposition in activism is one of the main things I've noticed, is that in a movement where people are actually trying to make a difference, that sometimes it can get infiltrated. I have seen infiltrators.
Yeah.
And actually, this is kind of not exactly the grandiose movement of controlled opposition, but I've been involved in situations where literally it seems that a spy from the government is at the party. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Sometimes somebody will come into a situation and you'll start to wonder, is this person for real or are they an actor? Co-intel.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. So I mean, that's one kind of, it's actually kind of amusing to me at this point because it just makes a story. But I've been in the situation where there's somebody at the party that just has the right answer for everything. They're like an internet shill.
Yeah, they got it all scripted out.
And they know there's going to be a bunch of libertarians at this party.
They will go to great mental calisthenics, I call it,
yeah,
to explain away anything and everything, to find any possible reason, no matter how convoluted, no matter how nebulous and obscure, why it's not that, but something else. It's fairies. It's dust that's getting in the samples. I think that's what it was back then.
Oh, you're talking about the geoengineering.
Yeah.
Right, because we said, they found aluminum, barium, and strontium, and then the hired shill can always say stuff.
Dust is getting in the samples.
So there is that co-intel aspect
yeah.
to the controlled opposition.
But oftentimes it's more subtle than that.
It is often more subtle. And by the way, if you do get this kind of treatment online, if you've put up a video on YouTube or something on social media that gets attacked by somebody, a lot of the time these are paid shills. And I say, don't feed the trolls.
That's right.
It's a waste of your time. I see it all over the internet.
Do not let them goad you into a back and forth. It's just, the goal is to divert your attention and to distract you from what you should really be doing, which in our case is making and distributing more orgonite. So,
but on a grand scale, there is controlled opposition in movements. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, one of the worst ones that I've had to deal with is in geoengineering. And I really believe that if you're talking about chemtrails and HARP, and that death energy, and you're not talking about the life energy, orgone energy, that you're missing half the story. So the controlled opposition, I call them controlled opposition because I have evidence that they know about orgone energy and they don't talk about it. So my feeling on it is, and this is just my feeling because this isn't provable, is that they don't want the information of orgone getting out and they want to keep a monopoly on that issue. Like chemtrails, they want to keep it a monopoly. So there are some organizations that are very, very big that never talk about orgone energy, such as geoengineeringwatch.org.
Yes, Dane Wigington, our famous encounter that we've talked
Right,
about several times. That was a more overt example of someone literally saying you cannot talk about this here or you will be removed. And
right.
that was just red flag is an understatement.
Yeah,
That
that's the
that's just
extreme.
yeah, that is an extreme example.
But we did kind of just gloss over this recently when we were talking with Ken, but there was a global chemtrails meeting in Canada recently, and I looked at the lineup here, and there are people who are speaking there. There were a couple of people there that I know about orgone energy. I know they do because they understand the electromagnetic nature of the atmosphere. Okay, and that's how we fight the weather war. So there was Scott Stevens, who was a weatherman, and his website is very interesting, weatherwars.info, and he's one of the main speakers on geoengineering out there. His website talks about the electrical nature of the atmosphere, and I find it absolutely fascinating. And I remember reading this long ago before I knew about orgone, and now I realize that he's attributing to HAARP and to them certain very interesting restored skies that are caused by orgone energy. So why isn't he talking about it? He uses the word chi. He describes the chi of the atmosphere. Chi is orgone, that's life energy. So if he can go there and talk about chi, my question is, how come he's not all over the orgonite gifting movement and distributing orgonite everywhere? Because he knows how it
Oh
works.
yeah, and especially considering how long people like that, especially him, but many others have been involved in the so-called movement to wake people up. I mean, we're talking about 5, 10, 15
15 years.
years or more even. I mean, how do you not
How do you
come
not know?
how do you not know?
You have to know. If you've studied the science of the atmosphere, if you've studied the science of rain, there's no way you don't know when the geoengineering is being undone. And if you don't know people are distributing orgonite, you would at least understand that the atmosphere is becoming healthy and negatively ionized. So what's causing it? So that's what my question is. How come Scott
Hmm.
Stevens doesn't get on the orgonite bandwagon, if you will?
Yeah, and people might say, well, there was a time when you didn't know about it, but okay, let's face it.
It's a short time
Orgone energy, yes, that's true.
because I've only
But
known about this for 4 years.
but let's face it. Orgone energy is subversive. It's a subversive topic, but it's not that subversive. It's not like,
Actually,
it's not like the lizard people, for
actually, it
instance.
is. It is very subversive.
It is, but if you type just a simple search like we did, you can find out all kinds of information. It's not there's there's not all that much digging
No, I
to
know.
do, I feel.
Ken Rolla says to go to the Great Oracle Google
Well,
because you can find
start
anything.
page.
Well, I use Startpage because Startpage is anonymous, but well, supposedly.
Yeah,
Okay, but
allegedly.
I don't know if it really is anonymous.
Maybe it's controlled opposition.
It might be. It might be because not only is there controlled opposition in the geoengineering, but there is in other areas of life, even infiltrating the arts. And this part really gets me. There is controlled opposition in visual arts and in music. It's not just a bunch of crappy substandard work just by chance. If anybody besides me has noticed that music and art have completely fallen apart in the past 50 years or so, rock music had its day. I think it almost was a movement of music after music already ended. Because after jazz, there wasn't any more complex music. Then we went to rock, which sometimes has complexity, but let's face it, this is not classical music. We're seeing a degeneration of an art form. However, I do love rock music up to a point.
And what about the progressive rock fans out there?
Okay, I admit I listened to Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Of course, and so did I.
Right. It's very complex.
That's right.
It's extremely nerdy though, and for me that's not in touch enough with universal consciousness. I need kind of music that reaches through the cosmos.
Yeah, I hear you. That was good for me when I was younger, and I'm a keyboardist and an organist, so I liked listening to that sort of Hammond organ led music. But yeah, there is something that it needs to go somewhere from there. It needs to access higher states of being and awareness and consciousness.
Well, at least they were putting in an effort. At least they were doing complex music in the way that they could. That kind of leads into where we are today. And really, with the murder of Kurt Cobain, I think that was sort of the nail in the coffin of rock. And that's when the genre really became taken over by the Illuminati. There are people who say that Elvis was mind controlled or that the Beatles were part of the whole Illuminati system, and I'm not sure about that. What I do know is in my lifetime, I've seen music go from something that was positive to something that's completely negative in the pop cultural sense. So when I say controlled opposition in music, it takes it to another strange level of in between fame and obscurity, which is the indie labels. And in the 90s, around the time, a little before Kurt Cobain's murder, and all the way through I will say the mid to late 2000s, because I don't know what's going on in pop music anymore.
And thank God for that.
I don't know what's going on in indie rock anymore because I stopped playing out in bands 3 years ago. But anyway, there is this whole other level of record label that I call the controlled opposition in music. They are pretend indie. So we have a genre that is such an expression of universal love, which is music, and it comes from somewhere else. And I can say this factually from my own experiences that I gather it from the cosmos when I make music. I'm not making it up. It's just coming through me. And that's how it is for a lot of musicians. But the whole indie scene are these labels that are really still dominating the major networks. They were dominating MTV back then. They were dominating college radio, and real independent artists couldn't get in. And the music that was dominating was really, really substandard. It was badly done. So badly done that even Beavis and Butthead noticed it.
And they don't notice much other than boobs and nachos.
Right. So during the time period of the 90s, a little before Kurt Cobain's death and following his death into the mid 2000s, we saw this total takeover of independent music. Right after his death, there were all the imitator bands. But they took this great expression of a brilliant artist. Kurt Cobain was a brilliant, brilliant artist that was totally mind controlled and taken into this dark system and given a handler, I believe, Courtney, I believe. But again, this is just my feeling having observed what was going on. They took this great music and totally flattened it and took out all the meaning from it. So now we're left with meaningless music. We're left with a shell of the expression. So we're not reaching into the cosmos anymore for our music. We're getting something that's given to us as a pretend version of an alternative to the mainstream crap. I'm sure you've seen this too.
I have, but I'm also a little bit younger than you, so by the time I started coming of age, it had already gone to pot by that time. And I was raised on 60s and 70s music from my dad, and then I went into other things. I went into jazz, but I was always going further back. I never got any satisfaction going forward and going with where pop culture and music at the time was going. And it was a very short time before I just completely lost interest in anything and everything that was going on in modern times. And by the time I was a legal adult, I was so into what was going on with my music and delving into past, because there's so much music out there. There is no shortage of music, but I was just so disinterested in what was around at the time that I couldn't have cared any less, quite frankly.
Well, I think again the musical paradigm is shifting too, and music is no longer something that you sit in an audience and watch or stand up there and do for an adoring audience. Now music, I think, is something that we share. It'll be more and more of a spiritual experience of sharing music in a group with people, chanting and that sort of thing, drumming. I don't know. I just don't see this whole like rock star paradigm continuing anymore, especially now it's been completely overrun. It's completely just a mind control machine of the elite.
It certainly is. And this has been going on for longer than people think. It's not just, it didn't just start when autotune came around. People like to to point these little things on the timeline and say, oh, this is when it started, or it was it was crap before this, after this point, but before that it was a golden age. Or of course, there are many different opinions, but the fact is that this mind control element has been going on for years and years, and people just have to stop listening to music that someone else chooses for them. Just like anything else, they need to just be themselves and just sort of neglect the BS. And speaking of BS, I have a lot to talk about in that field, because Sharon and I, deal with a lot of BS from a lot of different groups and subsects, and there are certain things that are going on that just I just need to call out some stuff here. I really need to do this. And one of my main gripes is the New Age movement. I cannot stand, and by the way, I just need to make a little warning here. This is not, I'm not trying to intentionally overgeneralize about people here. This is just something that I have observed, and I'm just stating my observations for the record. I am tired of these selfish hippies. What the hell is going on here? What is this? It's like almost across the board. Of course there are exceptions, but how? I'm sorry. I'm at a
It's
loss
not a
for
style,
words.
it's a state of mind.
Okay.
That's what it is. It's just a state of mind. Some people just aren't ready yet. They think that they know something. They know there's something greater than themselves out there, but they're just not ready yet to be part of a community, and they're still kind of into themselves.
Me.
Well, there are a lot of people like that, and that's actually very difficult sometimes to deal with.
Can I have this orgonite for free? I don't have anything.
Well,
I'll send you some rad vibes your way.
we have made that mistake so many times. But Orgonite is forgiving, and we give it away, and sometimes people say they're going to give something back, but they don't. But yeah, it's an issue. So the New Age movement is something that Cameron Day calls the New Cage movement, because it is a limited way of thinking, I believe, as well. One of the problems I have had is with selfishness.
Yep.
I think you just have to understand that people are just at different levels, and at least they're aware of something better than themselves, bigger than themselves.
They just have a ways to go, is what you're saying.
I think that's just the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just, we just have to be compassionate and understanding about it. But it is an issue also. And people will be very preachy too. And that's another issue I have, because we are all at our own level. So often there is this sort of, when someone is in the New Age mentality, or they consider themselves to be somewhat more enlightened than other people, there is sort of an ego element to that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The presumed superiority really comes out. And, there's nothing wrong with conveying new thoughts and new ideas, but I can really do without that holier than thou mentality. It's just, it just alienates people, bottom line. And, one of my problems is, there is freedom. It's very important. Freedom is a very important thing, but there's a difference between freedom and license to be a dumbass, for lack of a better expression.
Yeah, I had somebody recently tell me that they don't believe that people should own property. They don't believe that you can own the land. So therefore, they don't think there's any problem with walking across someone's private property. That's kind of that taking the liberties that you don't really have, because that's taking away someone else's freedom. That's the system we live in. We have property ownership right now. So even if you don't believe in it, you're getting in their personal space, and that's kind of a difficulty. So that's another preachy element of the whole.
And in fact, when I was a teenager, I read a book, I think it was by Michael Parenti, called Freedom Not License. And ostensibly, and this was many years ago, but I'm going to try and conjure it up, but basically the difference is freedom is you're in a crowded movie theater and you stand up mid-movie and yell, "This movie sucks." That's freedom. You have a right to do that.
Even though it's a really lame thing to do.
Yes, that's true. But you do have the freedom to do that if you choose to. but you cannot stand up and yell fire when there is no fire, and people panic and freak out and start running out of the theater, and people get trampled and hurt or worse. That's license, and there's a distinction made between those two. But
Also, the inability to face ugly truths is another issue with the New Cage movement.
Living in a bubble.
People don't want to know. It's too upsetting to see, let's say, a film that shows how people live in another part of the world where it's not as good as here, to put it mildly.
Mm-hmm.
I've literally had someone walk out on a play that we were at together because the play covered some difficult times in history for people who were in war and suffering, and she didn't want to hear it, even though at the end of the play they got to this great resolution of how they found God and they found universal love, and that's how they overcame suffering. But she couldn't face the ugly truth of the dark side.
Yeah.
So we got to face the dark side. The New Age movement definitely does kind of try to focus on love and light, which are great things, but we have to understand the shadow. As Buddha said, you must know suffering.
That's absolutely correct. And it creates imbalance in your life if you don't acknowledge that other side. It doesn't mean you have to wallow in it. It doesn't mean you have to linger in this fear-based negative state. It just means you have to acknowledge it and learn from it.
When he says you must know suffering, he doesn't mean you must suffer. He means you must understand the suffering of others. So that's how we develop compassion and love. So if you want to live in love and light, you do have to acknowledge when other people are suffering. And that will help you because you'll be able to help others.
Yeah, helping others that is ultimately what it's all about. And I think, Sharon, you have some gripes of your own too.
Well, the gripes today, our gripe session is about the New Age movement and the Liberty movement. So we've covered the New Age. So let's talk a little about the Liberty movement. One of the biggest problems I have with the Liberty movement, now, see, here's the thing. I do identify with both of these movements, by the way. So I'm not a New Ager, and I'm not a libertarian, but I identify with both of them. So one of the problems I have with libertarianism is that there's this separation. People keep themselves on the fringe and present ideas too hysterically. Mm-hmm. If we present ideas that are important, we're talking about freedom. We're talking about our own rights, our constitutional rights. We're talking about the rights to own land and have a firearm if we need to protect ourselves.
And just live a peaceful life in general.
Right. And
these are inalienable rights.
Right. It's not about guns. It's about having the right to defend yourself. It's about having the right to land and having the right to raise your family as you see fit without the state getting involved and saying, you can't send your child to this school unless you inject poison into them.
That's right.
So that's pretty much what we're looking at. So we need to present the issues in a rational way. This is something I've always thought was very important. And I sometimes think that the freedom movement gets a little too shrill. Although, again, this is decreasing. All of these issues I see in the last year or two kind of decreasing. But Alex Jones is extremely hysterical. Yeah. And he was my first view into the independent media pretty much in recent years. And
yeah, one of my first too.
Yeah. Also. He has presented so much information that has helped so much. I've gotten a lot out of InfoWars, but he is hysterical. And that hysteria does definitely create a separation. And there are people who also think he's controlled opposition as well. I'm not sure on that either way. I don't have enough experience with him to know.
The thing I don't get, though, is the thing that bothers me most is the fringe thing. It's like some of these people almost revel in it. Like it makes them feel special to be in a subversive topic. And that's really just, to me, that's just missing the point.
Right. So with both New Age spiritual ideas and freedom ideas, it's important that we present them in a rational way and don't come off as hysterical lunatics, because that's how the mainstream media wants to portray people who think differently. I'm not sure that that's how everyone thinks, but that's how we're portrayed when we think differently. So another issue, dwelling on the negative.
Oh yeah. We see that quite a lot, and that's a big problem for us because we are solution oriented, and we make every attempt to point that out to people that, you know, we can talk about chemtrails till we're blue in the face, but if you don't talk about the solution, you're completely missing the point.
Right. Well, also, stubborn avoidance of spirituality.
Yeah. Again, we go back to balance. There's got to be both. There has to be an acknowledgement of the fact that we are spiritual beings. It goes back to left brain and right brain too. We have two different sides of our brain for a reason, and one of them deals with the spirit element, and the other deals with the facts and the figures and the numbers. And we and again, you're absolutely right, Sharon, is that we have seen a decrease in
I
this
have.
type of
What
thinking.
we're looking for is the kind of a merging of spiritual ideas and the freedom movement,
That's right.
bringing it all together. And that's what we're working on. So that brings me to our next topic that I wanted to talk about, because we have so many things that have been going on lately, but we haven't had really a chance to get into it. So something very, very interesting happened this past week. We actually did a huge gifting trip that it was kind of an unprecedented gifting of orgonite. It completely flipped the energy in an entire region of California. In our second hour, we're going to have a guest joining us who's going to talk about what's going on in LA in this regard, because she's also doing the same work we are. There are more and more people every day doing this work. So we're going to talk about that in hour two with our guest Carmen. But what we did this past weekend was just amazing, because we went into a part of California, which is the agricultural area, Central California, and we distributed a lot of orgonites to all of the towers that we could see. We went off the roads this time. We were way more adventurous. We were very impeccable about it. We only missed, I would say, 2 or 3 towers that were just way too far to get to.
Yeah. And it's hard to see exactly where the roads are going because a lot of these roads are going onto people's private property and onto
And I
farmlands.
don't want
And
to do that, because I don't
yeah,
want to tread on their private
because we're not,
property,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I'm not that kind of person. But we had to kind of just do what we did. And we did it as quickly as we could. And we mostly stuck to public roads. And the only private road that we drove on said that we could drive on it, but that the owner might have the right to kick us off. So the sign was posted and nothing happened.
We did our thing and we left. We didn't make a big deal
Yeah.
out of it. It goes very quickly, but we gifted many, many pieces and many towers. And the results that we saw even the next day were simply unbelievable. You could feel the energy, the electrical nature of the sky. And it's not just a visual thing, but sometimes you can just feel it.
We have to be open to that kind of feeling. So a lot of people tell me that this is complete nonsense. That's fine. I don't mind. But I can tell you this: when we set out on this trip, we drove through the mountains to on a road that we had been on already. So we'd already gifted this road, and we passed a nasty tower, a nasty cell tower at the top of a hill just before the descent into the valley. So at that point, we were going to take a road we hadn't been on before. This tower we had double gifted months ago, so on both sides, just to make sure that it was that we got it
Yep.
within a close distance. And there was this wall of chemtrails over the valley below, just a solid layer of chemical sky, chemtrails, a brown, smoggy looking horizon as far as the eye could see, which stopped abruptly at the hill where the tower was. It was a noticeable stop. You could see this on my blog, thekembo.tumblr.com. The chemtrails just stopped. And then I'd see the planes continue to fly over the tower, and the chemtrails just couldn't come out anymore. They would break up into little pieces, and the sky turned a deep blue. So we saw that it was still busted. This is great evidence that placing an orgone energy device at the base of a tower neutralizes the tower. We saw more and more evidence as we went, which I documented throughout the day, and I wrote up an article about it, so you can read that. You can see the pictures and read it on my blog. We drove through the Central Valley. We busted every tower we saw. We drove off the highways to get into the fields and make sure we got them. And the sky at the beginning of the day was all chemtrails. The Central Valley is very hard hit, because
Yes.
this is where they grow the food. And one of the negative agendas here with the geoengineering, obviously, to me and to many people, this was in the film Why in the World Are They Spraying? One of the major agendas of this is to stop people from being able to grow organic food, to end the rainfall, which they did effectively for years, to acidify the soil with aluminum that the seeds can't grow. So people would be forced to buy the GMO seeds,
The
genetically
drought
modified,
resistant
aluminum
and
resistant.
yes.
So that's been well documented. I mean, we know about that now. Rosalind Peterson, another person who documented that. So we see the valley being attacked. And we did our distribution, and the funnel clouds came. We saw all the clouds funneling up, the sky turning blue, until all of that stuff cleared. But it took all day, it took many miles. So we did it. We drove all the way to Visalia, which is kind of in the center of it's in the center of Central California, and went to Three Rivers that night and camped. The next day we woke up and the sky was completely rejuvenated.
Deep blue, puffy clouds. It was just beautiful. We couldn't even hardly see any of the DOR layer that was so prevalent the previous day in the Central Valley.
We drove back and we did more gifting along a different highway, and we're very thorough again. There was only a couple that we couldn't get to.
We're talking about routes that are just, no matter which way you go, they're just choked with cell phone towers.
In the middle of an agricultural area.
Yeah.
And again, this brings up to mind, what are the towers for? They are not just for cell service. These towers are destroying the atmosphere. So when you see what they do, the before and after, it's something you really have to experience for yourself. Although I have hundreds of pictures of this that you can look at on my blog, the before and afters. But this is something that's really insidious. These towers are everywhere. They're set up in a grid fashion. I believe they work with the energy lines of the earth. I know that they send positive ions into the atmosphere, which stop rainfall.
Yeah, that part has been scientifically proven.
Yeah, and they allow chemtrails to persist. So we know what those towers are doing. We took care of them. We neutralized them with orgonite. We saw tremendous results. I didn't even recognize the Central Valley. That place is usually very desolate. The skies are usually flat and gray and polluted looking. And after a day of doing this work, it was like a different place. It was completely transformed. I have pictures of those puffy cumulus clouds and the deep blue skies. So it's pretty amazing. And we've seen some crazy things in the course of our gifting too. So I'm at the point where now I'm able to make connections with the geoengineering and a lot more than just weather modification. We've seen evidence that this goes beyond our government. This is why I get frustrated with the websites like Geoengineering Watch that just talk about it in terms of government programs and private contractors that are spraying chemtrails.
Yeah.
My question is, if it's government programs, then how do we expect to stop them? Just by, are we going to petition them?
Well, that was part of the frustration in attending Dane's event back in August, is that they have this one guy come up who says that we must stand together, we must fight this, but you're not going to get any solutions from your government. So where does that leave us?
And that's actually what everybody said, was we must stand up, we must stand together, we must raise the alarm and tell our government that we don't want them spraying us. Well, here's a question I get asked a lot. Why would the government spray us if it's getting on them too and hurting their families too? And people always say, oh, well, they're just psychopaths. They don't understand the consequences of their actions. 4% of people are psychopaths, according to Dane, actually, from a talk that he did. I found that to be an interesting statistic. He says 4% of people are psychopaths.
Well, I certainly hope he wasn't excluding himself from that from that percentage.
Well, it is a good question. Why would the government allow the spraying of its people, of its own families? And really, this goes into the real history of weather modification, which is something that's now making itself very apparent. This isn't being done by our government. This is being done by extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional entities. They are a parasite on our Earth. They are terraforming our Earth, and they've been doing so for 25,000 years. And this kind of ties in with that cycle of that 26,000-year cycle.
Right.
And it's just becoming more obvious to me, and as kookier as I sound to everybody, we are a genetically modified organism.
Yeah.
The human being is a GMO. We were created as a hybrid between an alien race and the primates.
Does Monsanto have anything to do with this?
I think they do. I was doing a past life regression and having a session with somebody who does this, a friend of ours, and I went back in time and I went back to the lifetime that explains why I'm doing what I'm doing today to try to fix the damage. In this lifetime, I was a scientist working for an extraterrestrial race, and I was responsible for so much of what was going on Earth. I was responsible for all the pollution and the manipulation of the human genome and all of this crazy stuff. Now, that might be, just my imagination. I went into it in a session, but it was an interesting analogy. I don't know how true the past life things are. I know I've had past lives. I don't know that I could see them. But I thought that was an interesting analogy for why I'm here today, because my karma led me here. If I was one of those extraterrestrials 26,000 years ago that caused all this havoc on Earth. Anyway, I'm not that familiar with the work of Zecharia Sitchin, but Gabriel is more familiar with this, and you've read about how we came to be.
Yeah, I've read a little bit of Zecharia Sitchin's stuff, and I always start out with the little story that he always used to tell about when he was coming of age and he was studying the Bible, and he discovered a discrepancy. I believe it was that I think the word Nephilim was mistakenly translated to giants when, through his research and his understanding, the literal translation was those who were cast down. And it bothered him to the extent that he brought it up with whatever. I'm Jewish, so I'm unfamiliar with how the the hierarchy of the church works, but he brought it up to whoever he felt he could confide in, I guess, and predictably, instead of being praised for discovering this, he was instead just chastised and told not to question the Bible and just to accept the given version, which of course he did not do. That just instigated his desire to explore these things further. And he discovered that he talked about the Anunnaki, which is a race of basically spacefaring extraterrestrial humanoids, which always is appealing to people when you say that term. But he discovered that about 450,000 years ago or so, they came from a planet called Tiamat. And see, I really need to investigate this stuff more, because it's been years since I read the 12th planet, and I need to.
And what is the 12th planet?
The 12th planet is Nibiru, or
Okay.
Planet X, which has a rotation of 3,600 Earth years, and supposedly it is now coming back into the solar system. Its orbit is elliptical in nature, so it doesn't move like the other planets move, and he goes on to explain how there was a collision between planets that formed our planet. It explains where the asteroid belt came from, which was where Earth's original orbit used to be, and explains where our moon comes from, explains why the Earth is missing a lot of its crust, particularly where the Pacific Ocean is. It's more thin there than it is anywhere else on the planet. And anyway, he goes on to describe a lot of this stuff that, again, I should retouch, because in the course of working with orgone energy, you just become so engrossed in that you start to kind of fall off on the other stuff. There's so
That's
much
true.
information, just
You
like the Police song.
You stop remembering all the details of 9/11 when you start working with orgone. It starts to not matter as much. All that matters is that you know the solution to these kinds of problems and how to end global tyranny.
That's right, and it doesn't need to be that way. There's always a solution. Nature has everything we need, and we just need to get back to nature and just sit down and apply ourselves, and it'll be much better that way.
Well, this is the thing that they're covering up. They're not covering up chemtrails. They're covering up our power, our true nature. That's what it all comes down to, is when we remember our true nature and we remember how powerful we are. And this isn't just a metaphor. We actually have an electromagnetic field we generate from our hearts. So when we become multidimensional and activate those parts of the DNA, then we will be able to eliminate the parasitic influence on Earth. Greg Braden was talking about the emotions of fear and love. Those are the two emotions that every other emotion stems from. And in the fear vibration, it's a much slower wave. And in the love vibration, it's a much faster wave. And he was showing a diagram of how the fear vibration and the love vibration hit the DNA. And the love vibration hits it in many more places because it's a faster wave.
Yeah, there's more potential sites for active coding. And then he talks about the 20 amino acids that are active in the DNA strand, and that there's 64 possible codes, but currently only 20 are active. And, there's many reasons for that. And we're finding that the
ETs.
Yeah.
We were genetically modified organisms.
And part of that genetic modification process was to make inactive from the get-go many of our amino acids. And now comes the time when we're starting to unlock that, and that's why they're freaking out right now, and that's why we do the work we do, and that's why we will be attending the March Against Monsanto or whatever they're called.
Monsatan. People like to call them that.
And I actually just wanted to relay a quick quote that I really love. That is, "The food you eat can either be the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison." And that is by Anne Wigmore. And that is so true, because the food is our lifeblood and our life energy. And we work with life energy too, but you have to watch what you eat, and you have to do some research and not eat the weaponized food, because like I said earlier, that's exactly what it is, weaponized food. And it's no good, and it goes in conjunction with all the other weapons and things that are around to suppress our consciousness and keep us in that lower fear vibration and prevent us from ascending and realizing our true potentiality and our true nature.
Well, the March Against Monsanto is happening on Saturday, the 21st. So please go out and support the march and meet like-minded people, because that's the main reason we're marching. Now you know you're not alone.
That's right.
And they might even be against vaccines. They might think that vaccines are poisonous. They might know about chemtrails. They might have actually looked up.
They might,
because they're at the March Against Monsanto.
You'll only know if you go. And while you're at it, please go to our website, www.thekembo.com. You can find links to all the wonderful things that we're doing, including an event on Sunday where we will be at the New Earth Expo at the Airtel Hotel in Van Nuys. We'll be there all day vending, and Sharon will be doing a talk at 12:30. It's free. That's right.
Can't go wrong.
Can't go wrong with free. So please come out to the Airtel Hotel in Van Nuys and see us on Sunday, May 22nd. And we have a lot of other cool things. We have links to our blog and our Etsy store where we're selling our handmade orgonite pieces. And we're very excited about Contact in the Desert. That's coming right up.
Contact in the Desert is from June 3rd through 5th, and we'll be there vending. So you can hang out with us, because we'll be at our booth all day, every day. Except when I go to see awesome talks. I'm going to go see Jim Mars.
Oh, boy.
And Laura Eisenhower. And there's so much more. Graham Hancock is going to be there. It's kind of an amazing event. And I hear it's a big party. So that's another great thing coming up, is Contact in the Desert.
Yeah. If Zecharia Sitchin were still alive, he passed away, I think, about 6 years ago. I would imagine he would be there, because there's so many wonderful speakers getting this information out there. And this is the time.
Yeah.
This is not just some crazy pipe dream. This is the time of human awareness and human awakening, and it's happening, and it's real. The parasites are freaking out right now.
They really
There's
are.
a reason that they're freaking out. It's because it's a reaction to something real that's going on, and it's within each of us, and it's up to us to take personal responsibility and activate what's already there.
Our
It's
DNA.
already there. It's just dormant.
Right.
It's not dead. It's just dormant. It needs to be activated. And once we activate it, there's absolutely nothing they can do. And it's a wonderful thing. We'll be back in hour 2 with our guest Carmen. We will be talking about the weather war in Los Angeles. Please join us. You've been listening to The Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. Welcome back to the Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. We're back in hour 2 now. We're going to be talking about the weather war, which is a very big topic for us, what's going on in California right now and beyond. But the weather war in California is very intense, and it goes hand in hand with the work we and many other people are doing with orgone energy and orgone energy devices. And it's an absolutely fantastic thing. And we've had so much support from so many people.
We're actually trying to get our guest on the phone right now. Carmen Grammer is in LA, and she does the same work we do. And she actually understands what she sees in the sky. That's what we try to convey, is that what you're seeing up there every day, it's not just the chemtrail sprayers spraying us, but there are many people fighting it against it and undoing the damage. So we're working very hard throughout the state of California to clean the sky. So if you see some strange clouds up there that don't look right, look at them a little more carefully. Are they funnel shaped? Is the sky a deep blue? Then you'll know that there are people working to clean it up.
That's right. It's not just them doing it to us. That we find there's a lot of that rhetoric going around, but if you actually pay attention to the formations, you can see what is going on in the sky, and it's not just them doing it to us. There's people fighting back, and it's a wonderful thing to see so many people taking their power back and doing something about the problem rather than just being in the doldrums and, oh boy, they're spraying us again, and feeling like they can't do a thing about it.
Well, I don't go as far as what Don Croft says, by the way, to say that the chemtrails are just a psyop at this point. I think they still do hurt people, but I know that any place that's been significantly gifted with orgonite, it's not going to be a problem. One of the issues that we have now is you can't even get a real weather forecast anymore. So we don't even know what's going on. We have to trust our own senses. We have to trust our own eyes, right?
Yeah, what did they say would be today? Like 90,000 degrees?
They said it would be 80, but
Yeah.
we did a lot of work to undo that, and they had to change the forecast. The problem is that a lot of people just read that, oh, they say it's an endless drought. They say it's the hottest year on record. They are still pushing a global warming agenda, even though we know that global warming isn't really happening.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where people are not believing their own five senses anymore, and it's just that part of it is a psyop. The ridiculous, it's absolutely preposterous what's going on when you're tracking the weather, when you're trying to go to a weather website and get some real actual data about what's going on, because they will just lie at every turn.
So what we have to do is start to learn to trust our own intuition. So many people are living in a manufactured reality. This is what Ken Rolla talked about, that he said 98%. That's a huge number of people who are living in a manufactured reality that's
All right,
not
we
their
have your
own.
guest on the phone.
Oh, great.
Hi, Carmen.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, Carmen, I'm glad you're here. We were talking about the weather war, and you know all about this more than just about anybody. So
join in.
So please join in the conversation and tell us how things are going in LA.
Things have been really nice lately. The skies, it seems like we've had a long period of respite amongst times of. I'm sorry. We get periods of some trails going across. But it seems so much more sparse than it has been. We went through a really, really heavy period, I would say about a year ago now, where it was just relentless whiteout all the time, and it would start early in the morning, and it would not let up, and you would just watch it all day long. But now, since you guys have been doing your work and other people have been jumping on board, I mean, it is a totally different place to be.
Well, you're one of the few people that I know that can see what's going on up there and understand it. So when you see it,
it's taken a long time to kind of interpret what I see, and I think it was a process of learning about the fact that there were planes spraying chemicals up there, and realizing that it wasn't just condensation. And once you start to put that together in your mind, and then you notice the patterns, and you notice that, oh, it's in lines, it's in straight lines, and then they're going to grid it, and then it's going to go across, and it's in 90 degrees. And then it just hangs there, and you watch it spread. All it takes is the smallest amount of attention, not smallest amount, I guess it takes more attention than that, but it takes attention over time, and you notice the pattern. And then for me, I think this is not right, because we didn't have any clouds earlier, and now we have these clouds that have a distinct rhythm pattern to them, and you can see them higher and higher and higher up these planes. They get smaller and smaller and further away, and yet they are still, putting out things in a grid pattern, and it looks fake, and our clouds are not real. And then you just start to wonder. I mean, it just takes a little bit of curiosity to try and find out what's going on. And then once you do, I was just thinking about this earlier, like there's a whole process of, part of the issue is people don't have time to wonder. They're too worried about feeding themselves and their families and keeping a roof over their head, and we all have to work, and we have to make this money to, survive. So who's got time to pay attention?
We've been put into survival mode. That's one of the things that the so-called elite do, is they get us into this mode where we can't even look, because they've devalued our currency to the point where we're working our.
Nobody has time to even look up. Right.
Right.
I mean, it's a big deal. And we get so tunnel visioned about getting from one place to another. And if you have a family, then you're doing their activities too. And, it's a luxury, really, to be able to understand what's happening in the world today. And people, it shouldn't be, but it is. And
that's by design.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. So once I noticed that, I went through a process of discovery, reading, learning more about the things, subjects on the side of that, a deeper understanding of geoengineering. And I have to say, I went through a pretty long period of, questioning everything after that. Everything was up for investigation, questioning, because it didn't make sense why someone or a group of someone would do this,
Well, we determined in hour one that it was ETs doing it, so we
just to fill you
in. We just answered your question there.
I'm so glad you guys discovered that. I've gone there, and then you find out there's only a certain audience that you can speak to about that, and not
very few.
But growing, the audience is growing.
It's growing. I said the word reptilian in public today, and there was only one blink. There wasn't like boink, boink, boink.
So we've gotten there. We've got to this point now where we can talk about the reptilian overlords.
Well, they're not overlords.
No, they're not. They're really not.
They're lowly parasites.
I agree with you.
Reich actually, to be fair, Reich figured this out 60 years before we did.
He did. So. He didn't know that they were reptilian, but he did know that they were parasites, and he knew that they were ETs, and that they were responsible for the geoengineering.
Yeah, what was the name of the book that he wrote that you were talking about?
Contact with Space. My favorite book.
Yes, I need to get that and read that, because I would like to hear it in his voice and his words.
Well, if you want to buy a vintage version of it, it's on eBay for about $4,500.
It's a very rare book. They burned almost all of them. So yeah, check it out on eBay. $4,500.
Wow, that's great.
But
Um,
you can also get a
it
Xerox
is.
copy of it for $50 from the Wilhelm Reich Trust.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes.
That's fantastic. I would like to support that. Um, the crazy thing is, well, I don't know if you call it crazy. I'm not going to qualify everything. Sorry, but the wonderful thing is the ability of people like us to dismantle risk with Organite. And if the people who were going to those talks by Dane Wigington, is that his name?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
knew what power they could have just by using the Organite individually, they'd probably never sign another petition and they would just start pouring Organite.
Right. And you've started pouring Organite.
And Dane would be out of a job too.
Well, that's part of it for the controlled opposition is they depend on these problems. That's their livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
But Carmen, tell us about your Organite journey since you started pouring Organite.
Right. So I hadn't yet connected the Organite with affecting our environment and energy and weather. I had just seen it in some of my reading and I was curious about it. And I found a couple of the forums out there and was really fascinated by people's own experience and all the different ways to make it or the conditions that you needed to have in your surroundings to be able to make it. You know, people who live in a colder climate, it's not as easy for them to make because it needs that more like room temperature, 70 degrees environment for it to cure properly. So I did a lot of reading before I was ready to do anything. And Sharon, actually, the video that you guys made on your Vimeo channel is really what catapulted me in to say, okay, I can do this. You know,
Awesome.
Cool.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it.
And my expert camera work, of course.
yes, and commentary, and it was very clear. And you know, of course, it brought up more questions for me. I always have more questions, but it got me going. So once I got my ingredients, well, I think before that, I discovered you guys because I had been reading about Organite. And then at the same time, I started to notice our skies had changed here in Los Angeles. The trails weren't sticking. And I remember one particular morning where I was driving in the morning and there had already been a lot of spraying happening that morning. But I could see the motion, that funnel cloud motion, and the conversion into the puffy clouds. I could see it across the whole sky, and it was such a visual confirmation of a transformation that I got really excited, and I was like, somebody is doing something here. Someone got out and did something here, and I want to know. I have to know what this is, and so. I think I watched for like 1 or 2 more days and was like, yes, it's changing. It's changed. And then so I wonder if it's Organite. And so I went online and I just Googled Los Angeles Organite, and it was either geoengineering or chemtrails. And I got to your blog immediately and I saw what you guys were doing and I saw where you were and I was like, this is it. This is this is who's
That's
doing.
Awesome.
And it's such a great feeling too. And it's the polar opposite of the feeling that you get when you're in the fear mentality of the Dane Wigington. That whole atmosphere is just it's no good. And it's
no, you're right. There's no you see that day after day after day, and once you realize, like, if you're not paying attention to that, then whatever, you're just underneath the cloud. But if you're aware, it's almost worse. If you don't have any steps of action you can take, and then it just becomes like even heavier on you. But then once it's almost like what Organite does at a cell tower. Once you realize the ability that you have, it flips. and there's that feeling of powerlessness turned into powerfulness. And
That's absolutely correct, and that's the key to the parasitic suppression of consciousness that was going on, is to say a person is not even aware of the chemtrail spraying; they're just going about their lives, versus someone who knows about it, but they've been told this lie of, yeah, it's going on, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're a victim.
They say you're being sprayed like a bug.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
very disempowering.
It's extremely
Yeah.
it is disempowerment writ large, and to have the solution and to see it in action the way you did, to get that visual confirmation, the funnel clouds, the forming, the transmutation into natural water vapor clouds, it's such an empowering thing, and it totally snaps you out of that fear vibration.
It was the
in a
same for
second.
us. It was the same for us. We saw someone else's orgonite work. We had looked up chembusters online and saw what they do to the sky. Then we one day saw that same blue hole with the 6 little points of cloud where the pipes are, and we put 2 and 2 together too. It's amazing when you learn it that way. You see it in action, and you're able to recognize that. And
in my practice, since I've been kind of on my journey, I find that when I'm ready for the next step, I tend to just ask for it in my reading, because I read every day. So if there's something that I need to know more about and I'm ready to ask for it, I ask for it, and then it just comes to me, so I think if people really want to make changes and they're ready for it, I think that is something that could work for everyone, is just to say, okay, I'm ready for the next step. I'm ready for the next piece of information. And it works, in my experience, for that to come forward to you. And that's totally how I came on the basic information in the first place, and then found you guys. And then it just goes on from there.
It's amazing. And it's great that we have a growing community, this disorganized network, unorganized network, where there's so many people doing the work. One of the tough things that I've noticed, and I want to know if that happened to you as well, is that certain friends kind of fall away once you gain this divine knowledge. You're given such a gift where you start to know your own power, and you understand your connection with the cosmos, with the universe. This is cosmic orgone. It flows throughout us. And my best friend for life and I are falling away from each other because she doesn't want to come along. She's still in that vibrational state that says that the 3D is all there is, and that starts to create conflicts. Have you also had the falling away? Yeah.
I feel like I have to make choices of where to put that particular type of energy, and it depends on if there's still a connection, and not necessarily from where we originally started, but is there an ongoing connection? If we can't talk about this, do we still at least connect on another level? And if so, then we're good. But sometimes, I haven't had too much of that experience. I have definitely tempered where I'm really willing to go in conversation a lot of the time.
That's for sure. You got to be careful, because people are not ready for some of these ideas.
Some people aren't ready. Some people really want to know more, and I still may temper that, because even though they're curious, they just may not be willing to go with me. And then I see that look sometimes when people aren't really willing or ready to go. There's a look that comes over, and you stepped too far, and you might have honestly damaged something. And so it depends on how you feel.
You're talking about fluoride and chemtrails.
Vaccines is the big one. That one's the one that really creates arguments.
but then you talk about spacefaring extraterrestrial humanoids, and then that just
that's it. That's the end of the conversation.
Yeah. Then you get that blank look, and then oh boy. But there are degrees. It's not black and white. Obviously, there are gradations.
No,
there are people who who are not even willing to talk about GMO food, which is about the very most basic of these issues. And then there are people who are willing to talk about a little more. There are people willing to talk about a lot more. And there are
And then
people,
there's those people who say too much.
yeah. Us.
Right. My
Yeah.
favorite ones, literally my favorite ones are the ones you say something to, and they clearly don't know the details, but they see it, So it's kind of like, well, they said to me, well, obviously anybody with eyeballs can see that, but it's it's the geoengineering in specifically, and it's such a breath of fresh air for someone to be willing to not immediately go to the shutdown mode and acknowledge that, yeah, there's something going on. I don't know what it is, but do you know something? And then they'll start asking you, what do you know? And that's the favorite kind of conversation that I have, because then we can start to talk. But back to the working with Orgonite, I found once I started to create it, I had a lot of my own personal kind of blocks removed. And I found that really interesting. Like the positive energy that it brings into your own personal day-to-day life. And I found myself finding a lot of solutions to things that I've not been able to, noodle out before. And also I gained a lot of ideas and insights once I started working with Orgonite, which I found interesting, as did people in my household. I feel like it made a big difference in terms of personal interactions. Things became more positive and smoother in an interesting way. That just happened to coincide with starting to make Orgonite. I've given Orgonite to some friends for their homes, and they tell me that they sleep better, their children sleep better, and when they have overnight guests, they sleep amazing. And
yeah, that's the most common report that we get too, is that people sleep better. I think that's I'm going to go on a limb and say that that's across the board the most common. Yeah.
I've had some great reports too. We've had one report of somebody who was able to stop taking antidepressants. And another person, it's huge, because the orgone is the life energy. It's life. So we're infusing ourselves with the life energy that makes us happy. And he was able to get off of the drugs. And another person had his asthma cured, which is really, really amazing. And this was someone who didn't even believe that the Orgonite would do anything. He just thought it was nonsense. So we hear some really excellent reports.
Did he wear Did he wear the Orgonite on his body, or was it just in his environment, or combination?
It was on. He carried it with him.
It was one of our little pyramids that he carried.
One of our ziggurat pyramids, and he just carried it in his breast pocket, and yeah,
he had great results. And everybody has their own issues, and I think what it is if your issue is caused by EMF, the Orgonite will help, right. And that seems to be across the board. And the sleep issues are caused by EMF.
In my ideal world, we would have, every school kind of on the four corners with Orgonite. And then every public building, courtrooms.
I laugh. I don't mean to laugh. I'm laughing because the schools and the public buildings are the ones where they put the cell towers and the cell phone panels. Right, so literally the opposite is being done. Yeah.
Right. So we need to get teams on those locations for the sake of our children.
Or we could just build the schools entirely of Orgonite.
Well, one of my ideas actually, I think we should fill potholes with Orgonite.
You can be the first. You could start, because you've got you're making your Orgonites. We toss them wherever we think they're needed, and if it's needed in a pothole, then that's where it should go.
Just get some traffic cones and some caution tape and a
I
couple of those
know.
blinky light sign thingies, and you'll be all set.
I've seen someone who actually makes these tiny little organites that he flushes down the toilet
Yeah.
and he has a video on YouTube where he flushes them down the toilet so they can go off into the waters and be where they need to
Yeah.
be.
That's fantastic. I do have a construction worker's outfit from Halloween, so I could travel around Los Angeles filling the potholes.
There you go.
You should do that. That's how our gifting friend gets away with what he does. He totally looks like he belongs there. You know, he looks like he has a hard hat. He looks like he needs to be there. He's doing his work. You know,
Oh, he's doing his work all right.
he's got the vest. You got to make yourself look official. Look like you're supposed to be lurking around that cell phone tower.
That's great.
You know.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's safer.
Right. Because everyone could see you. But that's actually the opposite of what we do. We actually are very covert. We're very quick. And ultimately, my recommendation for gifting Orgonite is that you do it quickly and get away from the scene so that, you know, you're not caught doing it. You want your gift to stay in place.
And leave the cell phone and the GPS at home, please.
Yeah, the GPS is a problem. It's a tracking.
Have you guys ever traveled with any amount of Orgonite on you, like on a plane through TSA or anything like that?
I have, and I didn't take a lot of it. I took, I would say, less than a dozen pieces with me. I recommend putting them in your checked bags. And they really don't, I mean, there's nothing they can really do, but it's better not to arouse their suspicion. And if you wear an Orgonite pendant, they don't even notice that. That's just jewelry to them.
Yeah. And
So,
I also traveled, it was about 2 years ago. I traveled with one ziggurat pyramid, small pyramid, in a keyboard case. I was playing one gig up in San Francisco Bay Area, and I stuck it in the case. And that was also a checked bag. So it was there on the way there, and it stayed on the way back. So yeah, as long as you keep it in the checked bag, it should be fine.
Well, we had another Orgonite gifter friend who had his checked bag inspected, and there was a notice on it when he got it back that they felt that for some reason they needed to inspect his bag. So that can happen, but all of the Orgonite was still there. As far as I know, when you're traveling domestically, it's if you have a large amount you want to bring with you for gifting another area, it makes sense to ship it to where you're going and then just pick it up when you're there. Because it gets heavy and it does arouse suspicion from TSA. But, yeah.
So are you guys going to do any demonstrations at Contact in the Desert?
Well, it's a little warm for pouring.
Well, also we don't do the actual pouring demonstration, but we're going to have a booth. And my demonstration is just to point out we've got Orgonites where you could see everything inside it. So I can point it all out and explain how it works. And so anybody can go ahead and make their own based on my recipe, which it's not really my recipe. I learned it from a video and I've elaborated on it. But Orgonite is just the same for everybody as far as how it works and how you make it. It's what you put into it that makes it different. So I'll be able to explain how they work, and I'll have plenty of time to talk with everybody at the booth.
And that's the video you found so constructive. So hopefully the same explanation given in person at this event will have the same effect with however many people come up to our table.
Right.
Okay, and then I have a question about some subtleties of making it. So what is your personal practice when you guys are creating a batch of Tower Busters? Are you obviously putting some intention into there? Are you guys playing any music, or what else goes into your Tower Busters that you can't see?
Well, I snort a lot of blow. I put some Slayer on, and then I sleep for about 18 hours.
We do listen to music. We listen to very nice ambient music, usually stuff that we consider our Orgonite making music. We love Steve Roach and Robert Rich. We also have our whole Orgonite soundtrack, like Kate Bush, Cloud Busting. It's a song about Wilhelm Reich. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. So we have the music that gets us excited for making the Orgonite. And there's also the intention of creating rain. It depends on what I'm doing when I'm making it. Like if we know we're making a batch for gifting, the intention of that gifting expedition is going to be in it as far as clearing pollution, because California, as we all know, is extremely polluted with geoengineering. So we put in that intention of cleaning pollution, which we did last time, and it cleaned the pollution. I mean, it's going to do that anyway, but I think the intention helps. And
It always
sometimes,
helps. It's just an added boost for if you're gifting and the orgonite is going somewhere where you're not going to be anymore.
right.
So it's just,
It's like leaving a little of yourself behind, and
yeah.
it's really ultimately our power that's powering the orgonite, because we're orgone generators as well. So I'll put in the intention for snow and rain. Often, even the very color of the quartz, the clear quartz against the metallic, shiny aluminum makes me think of rain and snow.
Yeah.
So I'm able to visualize it. So that's what I do.
That's fantastic. Okay, that's wonderful. One other thing I wanted to mention that I learned from you guys is how to look at the weather maps and watch the weather forecast go from, a high percentage of prediction of rain, and then you can see the planes come in for a while, and then you can watch the weather forecast in real time, watch the precipitation percentage start to dip.
Right.
I find that very educational. And I think sometimes people don't realize that what's going on off the coast and what blows in on us here in California.
Yes,
and
we do need to get out into the ocean, because that ultimately will disable the weather weaponry under the ocean. And there are HARP facilities under the ocean.
Just like there are on land, there are
Under the
sea-based
ocean.
facilities too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So those need to be gifted, and that's actually really difficult. Going on a boat is what we hear is a good way to do it. Planes, that's a little more difficult. So I think taking a cruise and bringing a lot of orgonite would probably be the way to do that.
It would work under the water, I presume?
Yes, they do.
Yep.
They work under the water. They in fact clean water, and it's a beautiful thing. It's sort of like the Masaru Emoto water crystal experiments, where he would say something loving, a word like love, and the water crystals would become coherent and beautiful. And if he said something
under
like
a microscope.
Under a microscope, if he said I hate you, it was ice crystals, the frozen water. If he said like
Right.
I hate you or something like that, it would come out very messy looking and
very
incoherent.
distorted and disorganized pattern.
And there were people that were actually able to bless water and purify it with blessings. The before and after of this polluted water from the Fujiwara Dam, I believe it was incredibly distorted. The water crystals were all deformed. And then after a blessing from monks on the water, they became coherent, the same exact water. So this life energy can transform matter. And that's what we're learning with orgone. It goes far beyond cleaning pollution. As you had mentioned, it removed blocks for you that you had in your mind. That's what it does. It's transformative, because it actually helps us to get back to what we already had. It's something we all have in us already. We're all orgone generators that can put out the life energy, and with a very thought or prayer can alter the fabric of reality. We're creators of our world. The orgonite is a tool to help us access that creative potential. And it sounds like you've experienced something similar.
Yes, and I want to do more of that. And
well, that's the natural.
What do you know?
That's the natural pattern. Is when you get a little taste of that, you want to do more. There's if you have any humanity in you whatsoever, that's just the natural way of things. Is that you just want to explore it further and see where it goes.
You know what? I think that's a misconception of that we as humans have, because we've been trained for so long to be in that dualistic mindset of, I win, you lose, good versus evil. People need to start to shift their thinking, and I think that's what's going on more and more, is that we as humans can all work together. And even though we're not alike, we still can have compassion for one another and work for a greater good, a good outside of us. And it is more valuable to lift people up than to put ourselves first. But I think people are so trained to think, we're even teaching our children, this board game, I win, you lose. There's got to be a winner. Can't do it together. We need to change our culture.
Well, one of the many benefits of orgone energy is that it facilitates that very thing. It facilitates that compassion and so many other, just a bevy of other qualities that would naturally exist without these weaponized, without the weapons, basically.
Right. Well,
I can't put it any other way.
Weaponized. The air, the food, the water. When we were talking with Jim Marrs about his book Population Control, we see that every aspect of our lives has become weaponized, even medicine. And now we know something is wrong. So This is about getting back to ourselves and understanding that everything we need is right here on Earth. We actually have everything we need in nature and amongst each other. And when you remove these sources of pollution and, energetic warfare, weaponized food, when you remove all these from your life, you can get back to yourself. And the orgone energy just pushes it to the next level. I find through working with it, I am much more in touch with my roots as a human being, and I want to know more about my origins. It brings up a lot of interesting issues.
And it's so much more powerful than the death energy too. That's the fascinating thing. And I actually would like to get a little quote from Dr. Len Horowitz that I always think of. It was in the film Esoteric Agenda, which I just watched again, is that he says you can walk into a pitch black room full of evil and full of darkness and light one match, and instantly that darkness flees. But you can't do the opposite. You can't walk into a well-lit room full of truth, full of wisdom, full of happiness, full of joy, full of compassion, etc., etc. You can't walk into that well-lit room with any amount of darkness and have any effect whatsoever. And that is a perfect example, perfect metaphor, representation of just how powerful orgone energy is and just how much unbelievably, monumentally stronger it is than the death energy. And that's why we're winning right now, is because it's just so much stronger, and it's natural. That's the crazy thing, is that this is just the way it naturally is. And to touch on what Sharon was just saying. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
To touch on just real quick what Sharon was saying, is that when you strip away the artificial weapons that are keeping your consciousness artificially low, not yours, but everyone's consciousness artificially low, when you strip away that thing that's just distracting people, when you get rid of the electromagnetic noise, then it is simply a natural progression for humanity to become more compassionate and become more loving and become just a much better species than it has been for the last several thousand years.
Well, and I'll take that one more step. And the other thing that keeps it in place so much, and I really appreciated your interview with Ken Rolla about this and what he said, his overarching theme is if we can remove the mind control, because that's what keeps a lot of this negative energy in place. Mm-hmm. It's the narrative that people have been given for so long. And if you can break people out of that programming and give them the positive life energy that Orgonite provides, then it's a whole different ballgame.
Yep, you are spot on. You are absolutely spot on. And that is the key, and it's tough because literally everyone is mind controlled in some capacity.
And it's like you could feel like you've broken it, but there's still more. There's still more layers. I've had to break so many programs, and I'm still working on it now. It takes such a long time. It's a lifetime of conditioning that we've been given, indoctrination in the public schools. But now it's gone much, much further. And I'm sure you've noticed that there's more of a backlash of the parasitic elite pushing on us these wireless technologies in every little part of our lives. It's not just smart meters now. It's not just cell phones. I noticed that the new digital cameras are now Wi-Fi enabled.
Yeah.
Everything is wireless. The wireless printers, the wireless mouse. We're just living in a sea of electromagnetic
Wi-Fi on the
pollution.
beach.
Right, and I saw that too in LA. Unfortunately, they're putting wireless at Santa Monica Beach, so people are going there to get their negative ions and feel healthy by the ocean. It's not about looking at your cell phone or your computer. You're at the beach. This is the time to be with the water
Right.
and the sun. This is a backlash of the parasites to suppress consciousness, and I wonder if you've also noticed some of the mind-controlling effects of the electromagnetic pollution.
I see everyone's face attached to their screen. They can't get away from it, and it's so unfortunate. It's really, it would be, you would feel really backwards now to go plug your phone into the wall and use a corded device, but that's actually what's safer.
Are you calling us backwards?
We use the landline.
No, I'm
How
saying
dare you?
most people would feel backwards to do
Right.
that when
It seems
actually,
that way. I agree.
and it's almost as if to be aware of some of these things and to make changes in your life, people think you're elitist to do this. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you are concerned about your food and you want to eat organic, and you go to the farmer's market exclusively, almost exclusively, or you care where your food comes from, then I think there's a factor coming in, a cultural factor coming into that of being snobby or elitist or better than you.
Well, that's probably the most childlike misconception I've ever heard of. But I do agree with you that is what the mainstream narrative would have us believe.
I think that more people every day are opting for organic choices, though, to where it's not just, the latte-toting liberal in West Hollywood anymore, but now it's everybody across America.
Well, then also culturally, people who are concerned about vaccines are going to be grouped into that, that as well. We have the luxury of choosing or not choosing because we think we're smart enough to get over the hump of that debate. And people resent those choices. That's maybe.
I know what you mean. That's in a way, I think that's an urban point of view. In a way, because now that I've moved out of the city.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's for sure. I think it is an urban point of view.
I think it's actually, there's an issue with cities now, and this is why we left. This is part of why we left. There are many reasons to get out of cities. This is the time of Agenda 21 really infiltrating into urban areas. The idea here is to get us all in the city, stack and pack us, and get us off the land. And there's a real stigma now about people who homeschool and who want to live a free life in the country away from the city. And it's actually not, I don't really think that people even believe this lie so much. I think it's just pushed by the media. But there is a stigma about it. I think that the whole idea of freedom is becoming much more popular now. And it's not just a liberal thing anymore to want healthy food. It's people who are also considered politically conservative that want healthy food. It's becoming an idea now where we're looking at the greater good of humanity from beyond party lines. So there may be.
True. I feel like it's the ability to have the food of your choice is definitely an economic. There's an economic divide over being able to choose what you eat.
It's true, but again, from the urban perspective, that is most definitely the case. But what I've noticed is moving out of the city, it's so much cheaper to live out of the city, and you have natural access to those things. So in a way, once we get out of the whole artificial paradigm of currency and start living more off the grid, I think that kind of barrier will break down because you no longer need a lot of money to eat that way. In Los Angeles, you do. I mean, in LA, you've got to go to Whole Foods. And I noticed that heirloom tomatoes at Whole Foods cost, 4 times more than we paid at a farm stand in Central California for the same tomato just this last weekend. So when you get out of the city and get out of that matrix, it doesn't become as much of an economic hindrance to live healthy because you have access to land and fresh food that you can grow. Meanwhile, you're paying
That's
less
true.
rent.
But I think also there is there's a factor of education about knowing what food is better for you, and I
That's
feel
true.
like in some of the rural areas where people are honestly like scraping by on meager wages, they don't know what's better for them or why.
Yeah,
They just
that's
buy
actually a
what's in the
problem.
store. Yeah, that
Well,
makes
if I
me
may
feel
interject
sad.
real quickly, I do agree with you, Sharon, that I feel that the consensus, the overwhelming consensus is that these stigmas are just peddled by the mainstream media, and they are not by any stretch an accurate representation of what most people think. And this the perpetuation is obviously failing because the more and more people that choose to think about what they eat or choose to homeschool their child or choose any one of a number of decisions that will ultimately be better for them and their loved ones in the long run, the more people that do that, again, it's about that wall just breaks down.
Right.
But when you reach that critical mass, it's just there are too many holes in the dam and they can't keep plugging them up. It's just the dam is gonna go bust and then out comes the water.
Well, I want to ask Carmen, since you're still in LA and you have children to care for, I want to ask you your strategies on food and how do you get the healthy food that you can afford?
I do use as much organic produce as I can. I try and cook as much as I can. You have to find a balance between time and convenience. So, I try and cook most of our meals. It's not that we don't use some things that are packaged, but I try and be judicious about what those are. And sometimes it's a struggle for the fresh food to be the first choice when it's snack time. But I find if you set up habits and set up expectations is the main thing. It's like this is what we value in terms of the type of food that you need to fuel your body, and you need to put the chips away until the fruit or the vegetable, that comes first. So it's about making healthy choices as the first line, and then taking the time to put together balanced meals, and then just the hardest thing I find is avoiding sugar, not for myself but for my kids. And some kids have more of a taste for sweetness than others, and I find that our culture is very we reward kids and treat kids with sugar like that, because it tastes good. But pretty soon, over time, they come to expect sugar, whenever they want to feel good, and it kind of starts to act like a drug, and that bothers me.
Yeah, I think our culture is very sugar addicted in the United States, and thus the influx of, high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, and sugar beets, which are
Also GMO.
95% GMO now.
Right.
So that's no good.
Yeah, there's a big push for sugar in the processed foods.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a huge push for it, and just even, we don't cook with it a lot. I don't make a lot of desserts because I know, every other day there's going to be an option for it somewhere in my kids' lives. So I take most of that out of our day to day, and it's hard for me to give them a treat because I know they've got something waiting. They've got that next birthday party coming up, or they've got, there's a bake sale at school to raise money for whatever cause. And that's a fun way for them to participate, or, so I think that's the hardest thing for me to deal with is just sugar around every corner. I went through a period in my life, and part of the reason why I know the effects that it can have is I went through a period where I started having reactions to sugar, and it was I wasn't watching my diet closely at that time. I was younger. I was in my 20s, but for some reason I started having a reaction to things that had sugar in them, and it was almost any kind of sugar. And I had to take a look at that, and I had to listen to my body, or I wasn't going to feel good for hours. And it just kind of came on kind of suddenly, but I think I hit a threshold somehow. And so I cut it out for a couple of years, and then I would take a very small amount, and that would be kind of a treat, like maybe a corner of a brownie or something. That's about all I could handle.
Yeah.
But even once, if I have it now, sometimes I can, if I've already been starting to fight a virus or something like that, and I have a little bit of sugar, I feel worse immediately in terms of getting sick. And so I have a very clear indication of what that does for me. And even though I know my children don't feel the same way as I do, I know it's having that effect on their immune system.
Well, it feeds a lot of harmful organisms. So the sugar will feed candida in your body, and that's a huge problem for a lot of people now. But there are other sources of that as well. Heavy metal poisoning leads to that as well.
Well, I think there's probably, I don't know if candida is a fungus. Is that right?
Yes. It's like yeast,
okay.
Or a fungus. It creates yeast infections. It's a big problem. And you have to really cleanse parasites out of your body to get rid of them.
I feel like there is a different way of thinking when you've gotten sugar out of your system. There's a clear way of thinking. I think there's just a lot of clarity when you eliminate that from your diet. And when you introduce it back in, I think you can see a difference.
That's like so many toxins I've noticed when I eliminate a toxin. Like the huge one for me was the wireless internet. When we got that out of the house, I slept better. And then when we reintroduced it for a friend who was staying over, I couldn't sleep all night and I felt horrible. And the next day the sky was covered in chemtrails again because it actually inhibited the workings of our orgone devices.
But then we got it out for good.
Yeah.
And then, as John Lovitz would say, good for you, Jack.
Well, speaking of which, I do want to move on to our activation of our higher selves, because we're talking about getting toxins out of our bodies. So we reject the GMO, and I agree with you that the sugar is very detrimental, especially because so much of it is genetically modified to be poisonous to us because it's high fructose corn syrup and sugar beets. So we're moving on to higher ways of thinking because we're eliminating so many of the things that are blocking those channels.
Right.
We found with using the orgonite that we are actually starting to become multi-dimensional beings. I feel that we're in the infancy of the activation of our DNA right now. This is a huge thing. Have you noticed these capabilities opening up, like psychic abilities or just able to see beyond what you used to see?
I definitely feel like I have more intuition. I feel as if I have more connection to my environment. There's more, when I ask a question, I get an answer dynamic. Yes, I think there is definitely. But that, I really, to be honest, I'm not sure if it's more related to orgonite or if it's more related to Reiki, because I also noticed that happening. And I became attuned to Reiki before I started working with orgonite.
Well, it's the same thing. It actually is the same. You're working with
tapping into the same life force.
It's exactly the same thing. There's so many ways to get to the same thing. And so that's actually the root of what's going on. Is I see the activation of the inactive DNA, what they call the junk DNA in our bodies, and the elevation of consciousness. And it's happening really, really fast.
So that's how you would define activation of DNA is elevation of consciousness, because I hear the activation of DNA, but I don't know how I would know that.
That's exactly what it is. We are activating our consciousness, and we're doing so by removing toxins, by removing EMF, by bringing in life energy, and by educating ourselves. And Carmen, we have to go, but I want to thank you, Carmen Grammer, for joining us today as our guest commentator.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your insights on orgone energy and so much more on the human frequency. Please visit us on Sunday at the New Earth Expo in Van Nuys, and we look forward to seeing you there. We will see you again next week on the human frequency on American Freedom Radio.